How can this Hottie be with this old man? The adolescent voice, full of bravado and judgment, sliced through the Friday night ambient noise at Murphy's Tavern in Charlotte, North Carolina. My name is Ray Emerson, and at 54 years old, I've learned a few things. 2 decades in the Marines taught me, above all else, to assess a potential threat before it ever fully materializes. These 3 college-age kids had been openly gawking at my wife Alice and me for the better part of an hour, whispering to each other and pointing from their secluded corner booth. Alice, who is 49 but could easily pass for mid-30s, squeezed my hand under the table. Tonight, she was wearing a magnificent blue dress that perfectly complemented her eyes, her auburn hair catching the soft, golden light from the bar. After 26 years of marriage, she still has the power to take my breath away. "Ready to get out of here, honey?" I asked, my voice as even and controlled as if I were giving a debriefing. The loudest of the 3, a blonde kid with a backwards baseball cap, stood up as we walked past their table. His 2 buddies flanked him with all the serious demeanor of a grand procession. The blonde wore a University of North Carolina sweatshirt and probably weighed no more than 160 pounds, soaking wet. "Seriously, though," he said, projecting his voice loud enough for at least half the bar to hear. "What's a woman like that doing with a guy like you?" I came to a full stop. Alice's grip on my arm tightened to an almost painful degree. From the corners of my vision, I could see other patrons turning to observe the unfolding scene. The bartender, an older gentleman named Pete, paused from wiping down his glasses and looked up. "She probably changes his diapers." The second kid, a stockier one in a Letterman jacket from some high school, added with a sneer, "Come on, beautiful. We'll show you what young guys can really do." The third kid, tall, lanky, and with greasy hair, moved to block our only path to the door. "Yeah," he chimed in, a cruel laugh in his voice. "Grandpa probably can't even get it up anymore." I looked at these boys. Truly looked at them. They had soft, unblemished hands. Their jeans were designer brands, and they possessed the kind of manufactured swagger that comes from watching too many movies and not from any real-life experience. They were the type of kids who had never thrown a proper punch in their lives. "Yeah, sure, kiddo," I said, offering a slow, deliberate nod. Alice knew me well enough to recognize that tone. It was the exact same one I used when dealing with recruits who thought they knew better than their drill instructor. It was calm, it was patient, and it was deeply dangerous. The blonde kid, in his immaturity, mistook my restraint for weakness. His chest puffed out like a preening rooster. "What's that supposed to mean, old-timer?" "Nothing at all," I replied. "We're just on our way out." But as Alice and I began to move towards the exit, I could feel their presence behind us. The entire energy in the room had shifted, and Pete the bartender caught my eye, shaking his head slightly as if to apologize for what his establishment was about to witness. Something in my gut told me that this night was far from over. 2 decades ago, I would have handled this situation much differently. Back when I was Staff Sergeant Emerson, teaching hand-to-hand combat at Camp Lejeune, my patience for disrespect was razor thin. But Alice changed all that. She taught me that true strength isn't about proving yourself to every punk who thinks he's tough. I met her in 1998, right after my 3rd deployment. She was a compassionate nurse at the VA hospital caring for guys, like me, who came back carrying more than just duffel bags. The very first time I saw her, she was holding the hand of an old Vietnam vet while he quietly wept about his nightmares. That's when I knew she was a different kind of person. We married a year later. Alice had wanted children, but it never happened for us. Instead, we poured our entire lives into each other. She supported me through the rough transition to civilian life, and I supported her through nursing school and then her master's degree. Today, she runs the trauma unit at Presbyterian Hospital. Tonight was supposed to be a special occasion. Alice had just been promoted to department head, and we were celebrating at Murphy's because it was the location of our very first date. The same corner booth, the same Friday night crowd, and the same bartender who remembered us from back when we were young and broke. But those college kids had been watching us all evening. I had noticed them the moment we walked in. The way their conversation immediately stopped when Alice took off her coat. The way they nudged each other and snickered. The way the blonde one kept craning his neck to get a better look at her. I've seen that same look before in bars overseas when some drunk soldier decided he wanted something that wasn't his to take. It always ended the same way. Alice noticed too, but she's used to the attention. After 26 years of marriage, she still turns heads wherever we go. Usually I take it as a profound compliment, but tonight felt different. "They're just kids," she whispered when she saw me watching them. "Ignore them." But as we sat there sharing our appetizer, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Drifting over, something about being wasted on an old guy and betting she was desperate for some real action. That's the kind of talk that crosses a line. The blonde kid got up to use the bathroom and had to walk right past our table. He slowed down, looked Alice up and down like she was a piece of meat, and then winked at her. Alice looked away, clearly uncomfortable for the first time all evening. That's when I knew we were leaving. Not because I was afraid of 3 college boys, but because Alice deserved better than spending her promotion celebration listening to their garbage. I should have known they wouldn't let it end there. The parking lot outside Murphy's was dimly lit. Just a few lonely streetlights cast long, ominous shadows between the cars. Alice and I were halfway to my truck when I heard footsteps behind us. "Hey, where are you going?" The blonde kid's voice carried across the asphalt. We weren't done talking. I stopped walking. Alice's hand automatically found mine, as it always does when she's nervous. In 26 years together, she's seen me handle exactly 3 fights. Each time it was over before it ever truly started. "Ray," she said quietly, "let's just go." I turned around. All 3 of them stood there under the parking lot lights, acting as if they owned the entire world. The blonde kid had his phone out, no doubt recording what he thought would be his big moment of glory. "Problem is," the stocky one in the Letterman jacket said, "we think your wife might want to spend some time with real men." The tall, skinny one laughed. "Yeah, before she forgets what it's like." That's when something inside me clicked. Not anger, not rage, but more like a switch flipping from one setting to another, from civilian Ray to Staff Sergeant Emerson. Alice felt the change in my posture. "Ray, it's okay, sweetheart," I said, never once taking my eyes off the 3 kids. "These boys just want to dance a little." The blonde one stepped closer. "Dance? What the hell does that mean?" "It means," I said, placing my keys in Alice's palm, "that you followed us out here because you think you're tough. So let's find out." I shrugged off my jacket, folded it with practiced precision, and handed it to Alice. The movement was deliberate, the way I used to prepare for training exercises when I needed to demonstrate a technique for new recruits. "All right," I said, rolling up my sleeves. "You want to dance? Let's do it, but there's one rule. 1 kid at a time." The 3 of them looked at each other and started laughing. The blonde kid pocketed his phone and cracked his knuckles. "You serious, old man? You want to fight all 3 of us?" "1 at a time," I repeated, "unless you're scared." That got them. Young men and their pride. It was and always will be their greatest weakness. Alice stepped back towards my truck. She knew exactly what I was capable of, even if I hadn't had to show it in years. During my time in the Corps, I taught defensive tactics to Marines half my age. I know how to read an opponent's balance, their momentum, and their intentions, which are always written in the angle of their shoulders. These boys had no idea what they were about to walk into. The blonde kid rolled his shoulders, getting ready to charge. The other 2 flanked him, assuming numbers would give them an insurmountable advantage. What they failed to grasp was that 2 decades of training doesn't simply disappear because you put on civilian clothes and get older. The blonde kid came at me first, just as I knew he would. College boys always lead with their ego. "This is for calling us kids, Grandpa," he yelled, winding up for what he likely thought was a devastating right hook. I watched him telegraph the punch for what felt like 3 full seconds. His weight shifted to his back foot, his shoulder dropped, and his whole body coiled up like a spring loaded backward. In the Marines, we called it slow-motion Sunday, when adrenaline makes everything crystal clear and you can see exactly what's coming. I stepped to my left, just enough. His fist whooshed past my ear, carrying all his momentum with it. The kid had put everything he had into that swing, counting on connecting with my face to stop his forward motion. When he hit nothing but air, physics took over. He stumbled forward, completely off balance, arms windmilling. I didn't even have to push him. I just stepped aside and let him crash face first into the brick wall of Murphy's Tavern. The sound was like a melon hitting concrete. "Brad!" The stocky kid in the Letterman jacket yelled, rushing to help his friend. But Brad was finished. He slumped against the wall, blood streaming from his nose, trying to figure out what had just happened. "My face," he mumbled through split lips. "You broke my face. You broke your own face," I said, brushing imaginary dust off my shirt. "I just moved out of the way." The Letterman jacket kid, whom I'd overheard the blonde one call Tyler, looked at me with new eyes. Some of the cockiness had drained out of him, but he was still young enough to think he could salvage this. "You got lucky with Brad," Tyler said, pulling off his jacket. "But I played football in high school." "Good for you," I said. Tyler lowered his shoulder and charged like he was going for a tackle. High school football tactics against someone who had spent 2 decades training Marines in close combat. It would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. I waited until he was 2 steps away, then grabbed his outstretched arms and used his own momentum to pivot him sideways. "It's a basic martial arts principle, redirect force instead of opposing it." Tyler found himself spinning in a direction he never intended to go. He slammed sideways into the large dumpster behind Murphy's, his impact ringing the metal like a bell. But his momentum wasn't finished. The dumpster was just high enough that when Tyler hit it at waist level, his legs kept going up and over. "Help!" came his muffled voice from inside the dumpster. "I'm stuck!" I looked over the edge. Tyler was wedged upside down among the garbage bags, his legs sticking up in the air, his Letterman jacket tangled around his head. He was flailing like an overturned turtle. 20 years in the Marines taught me patience, boys," I said, straightening my shirt. "It also taught me about leverage." The third kid, the tall, skinny one, was backing away now. His name was Jake, I'd overheard. He kept looking between his 2 friends, Brad still slumped against the wall, holding his bloody nose, and Tyler thrashing helplessly in the dumpster, and me standing there without even breathing hard. "This is crazy," Jake said. "You can't just assault people." "Assault?" I raised an eyebrow. "Son, I haven't laid a finger on either of your friends. They assaulted themselves." Jake pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Good idea," I said. "Make sure you tell them how 3 young men followed a married couple into a dark parking lot and threatened them." That's when Jake made his mistake. Instead of just calling the police or walking away, he decided he needed to salvage some pride. While he was talking tough about calling the cops, he was also winding up for a sucker punch, thinking he could catch me while I wasn't looking. But in the Marines, you learn to watch everything at once. Peripheral vision becomes a survival skill. Jake swung wild, a haymaker aimed at the side of my head. I ducked, and his fist connected solidly with the cast-iron parking meter behind me. The sickening crack of his knuckles hitting metal echoed across the parking lot. Jake screamed, not a yell or a shout, but a high-pitched wail that probably woke up half the neighborhood. He clutched his right hand against his chest, tears streaming down his face. "My hand," he wailed. "You broke my hand." "You broke your own hand," I said. The same way I used to explain consequences to new recruits. I ducked. "You punched a parking meter." By now, people were coming out of Murphy's to see what the commotion was about. Pete, the bartender, stood in the doorway, shaking his head. A couple of other patrons had their phones out, recording the aftermath. Brad was still against the wall, blood all over his University of North Carolina sweatshirt, looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. Tyler was still upside down in the dumpster, his struggles getting weaker as he tired himself out. And Jake sat on the asphalt, cradling his hand and sobbing. "Somebody call an ambulance," Jake pleaded to the growing crowd. "Already did," said a woman I recognized from inside the bar. As soon as we heard the screaming, Alice walked over and handed me my jacket. She had that look in her eyes, the one that told me she was seeing her husband the way she had 27 years ago when we first met. Not the middle-aged insurance adjuster who worried about lawn care and retirement planning, but the Marine who could handle anything life threw at him. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked, slipping my arms into the jacket sleeves. "Perfect," she said, linking her arm through mine. That's when Jake made one last desperate play. "He assaulted us," he yelled to the crowd. "This old man attacked 3 college students." Pete stepped forward. "Son, I saw the whole thing through the window. You 3 followed this couple out here and started trouble. This gentleman never threw a single punch." "That's right," said the woman who'd called the ambulance. "I was recording on my phone. Got the whole thing. These boys attacked themselves trying to fight someone who clearly knew what he was doing." Jake's face went pale as he realized his version of events wasn't going to fly. But he must have done something. "He moved," Pete said simply. "You boys did all the damage to yourselves." The sound of sirens was getting closer, both ambulance and police from the sound of it. Alice squeezed my arm. "We should probably stay and give a statement." "Already planning on it," I said. The truth was starting to sink in for these 3 kids. They'd picked a fight with someone they assumed was an easy target, and instead, they'd humiliated themselves in front of witnesses. Even worse, they'd done it while being recorded. Tyler finally managed to extract himself from the dumpster, but his Letterman jacket was ruined, and he was covered in whatever had been rotting in there. He smelled like old food and shame. "This isn't over," Brad mumbled through his swollen lips. But there was no conviction in his voice. "Yeah, it is," I said. "It's been over since before it even started." The ambulance pulled into the parking lot, followed by 2 police cruisers. As the EMTs started checking over the 3 college kids, I could see the awful realization dawning on their faces. They were going to have to explain to their parents, their friends, and their professors how they got beaten up by a 54-year-old man who never even hit them. Officer Patricia Williams took our statements while her partner, Officer Davidson, dealt with the 3 college students. I'd known Pat for years through my work with veteran support groups at the hospital where Alice worked. She listened to my account with professional interest, occasionally glancing at the phone videos the witnesses had provided. "So, let me get this straight," Pat said, reviewing her notes. "They followed you into the parking lot, made verbal threats, and then each one hurt themselves trying to attack you." "That's correct," I said. "I used their momentum against them. Basic defensive tactics." "Defensive tactics," Pat repeated, writing it down. "From your military service." 20 years Marines, I confirmed. Staff Sergeant, retired. Alice stood beside me, still holding my hand. I could feel her pride in the way she squeezed my fingers every time I answered a question. Over by the ambulance, the 3 kids were getting patched up. Brad needed stitches on his nose and forehead. Jake's hand was definitely broken, probably in multiple places, judging by how swollen it had gotten. Tyler was mostly unhurt physically, but he still reeked of garbage and his dignity was in tatters. "The thing is," Officer Davidson said, walking over from where he'd been interviewing the college boys, "their stories don't match up with what the witnesses saw." "How so?" Pat asked. "They're claiming Mr. Emerson attacked them first," Davidson explained. "But we've got 3 different phone videos showing them following the couple into the parking lot and instigating the confrontation." I wasn't surprised. Young men caught in embarrassing situations always try to rewrite history to make themselves look better. "They also keep insisting he must have hit them somehow," Davidson continued. "They can't seem to accept that they injured themselves." Pete, the bartender, approached our group. "Officers, I've been tending bar for 30 years. I've seen every kind of fight you can imagine. What happened here wasn't a fight. It was 3 drunk kids trying to pick on someone they thought was an easy target and getting a lesson in physics instead. The EMTs were loading Jake into the ambulance, his broken hand in a temporary splint. Brad refused transport, but he looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Tyler was being questioned separately by a 3rd officer who'd arrived as backup. "Are we free to go?" Alice asked. Pat nodded. "We have your contact information if we need anything else. But honestly, this looks pretty open and shut." 3 intoxicated individuals harassed a couple and then injured themselves while attempting assault. As we walked to my truck, I could hear Jake's voice from the ambulance talking on his phone with someone, probably his parents, judging by his tone. "Mom, you don't understand," he was saying. "This old guy, he must have been some kind of martial arts expert or something. He totally destroyed us without even trying." Alice laughed quietly. "Martial arts expert?" "Close enough," I said, opening her door for her. As I started the engine, Tyler walked past our truck, still reeking of dumpster juice, his ruined Letterman jacket draped over his arm. He looked through the windshield at me with something like respect mixed with fear. Brad was leaning against a friend's car, holding tissues to his still bleeding nose, talking rapidly on his phone. Every few words he'd gesture in my direction. "They're going to remember this night for the rest of their lives," Alice said as we pulled out of the parking lot. "Good," I said. "Maybe next time they'll think twice before harassing someone." But I had a feeling the consequences for those 3 were just getting started. 2 weeks later, Alice showed me the video on her phone during breakfast. "Honey, you need to see this," she said, barely containing her laughter. The clip had already garnered over 2 million views on various social media platforms. Someone had compiled all 3 witness videos into one seamless piece, complete with slow-motion replays and commentary. The title read, "3 college bros get schooled by Marine grandpa without him throwing a single punch." I watched myself calmly stepping aside as Brad face-planted into the wall. Then Tyler's spectacular dumpster dive played back in slow motion with dramatic music. Finally, Jake's tragic encounter with the parking meter, his scream echoing over freeze-frame shots of his shocked expression. "It's everywhere," Alice said, scrolling through the comments. "Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone even made it into a meme." The comments were brutal. "Imagine being so weak you get beaten up by physics. These boys really thought they were tough guys. That Marine didn't even break a sweat. When keeping it real goes wrong." But the real consequences went deeper than social media mockery. Alice had heard through her connections at the hospital that all 3 boys had been identified by University of North Carolina students who recognized them from the video. Their names, their fraternity affiliations, their social media accounts, everything was public knowledge. The university had launched a disciplinary investigation after the video went viral. Apparently, harassment of community members reflected poorly on the institution's reputation. Brad and Tyler faced possible suspension. Jake was already on academic probation, and this incident pushed him over the edge into expulsion territory. Their fraternity had suspended all three pending the university's decision. The same organization that had taught them they were untouchable was now distancing itself from them as fast as possible. "Look at this one," Alice said, showing me a comment from someone who claimed to know them personally. "These guys used to act like they owned our campus. Now they can't show their faces anywhere without people laughing." The viral video had become a case study in consequences. Every campus security office in the state was using it in presentations about harassment and assault. Every self-defense instructor was showing it to demonstrate how proper training could neutralize threats without violence. Three young men who'd started the evening thinking they were going to humiliate an older couple had instead provided the internet with weeks of entertainment at their own expense. 6 months after that night at Murphy's Tavern, Alice and I returned to celebrate our anniversary. Pete greeted us at the door with a huge grin. "The famous couple," he announced to the audio room. "Free drinks for our local celebrities." The corner booth where we'd sat that night was now unofficially known as the Emerson Table. Pete had even put up a small plaque that read, "Where respect was earned and lessons were learned." During dinner, Alice told me what she'd learned about our three young friends through her network at the hospital. Brad had transferred to a different school after his fraternity expelled him permanently. The facial scarring from hitting the brick wall had required plastic surgery, leaving him with a constant reminder of that night. Tyler had dropped out of college entirely after the video cost him his football scholarship. His parents had been mortified when the clip showed up on their social media feeds, shared by everyone they knew. He was living at home now, working at a grocery store and trying to rebuild his reputation one day at a time. Jake had faced the worst consequences. His broken hand required multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. The injury ended his dreams of playing baseball professionally. Combined with his expulsion from the university, he'd lost both his athletic and academic futures in one night. "Do you ever feel bad for them?" Alice asked, cutting into her salmon. I thought about it for a moment, watching the same Friday night crowd that had witnessed their downfall. Young couples on dates, families having dinner, older folks like us enjoying a quiet evening out. "They made their choices," I said. "Actions have consequences. I just helped them learn that lesson a little faster than they might have otherwise." Alice smiled and raised her wine glass. "To consequences, then." "To consequences," I agreed. As we left Murphy's that night, I held the door for Alice and watched her step into the parking lot where three young men had learned the hardest lesson of their lives. The streetlights cast the same shadows, but everything felt different now. Peaceful, settled. Brad, Tyler, and Jake had discovered that the world doesn't owe you respect just because you demand it. And that real strength isn't about intimidating people who seem weaker than you. Their public humiliation had followed them across social media platforms and into their real lives, costing them friendships, academic opportunities, and social standing within their community. The viral video had become a permanent record of their poor judgment, searchable by future employers, potential romantic partners, and anyone else who might Google their names. Their attempts to play the victim had backfired when witnesses and video evidence contradicted their claims, leaving them to face not only physical consequences, but also the loss of credibility and respect from family, friends, and institutions. The three had learned that some mistakes echo far beyond the moment they're made, and that 20 seconds of bad decisions can reshape entire futures. Sometimes the best victories are the ones where you never have to throw a punch.